Okay, let's dive right in. Does our sadness, need a filter? Does it have to have this poetic gloss to feel real enough for us to share? Or maybe are we only really listening if the pain sounds, well, beautiful?
It's fascinating, isn't it? This human tendency we have to shape experiences, especially the tough ones, into these narratives. It's
Right.
almost as if the raw feeling itself isn't sufficient. Like it needs a certain artistry to get validity for ourselves and, for other people too.
Yeah, why do we do that? Look for meaning in suffering.
It's a deep question.
Imagine depression just
Yeah.
stripped bare, no evocative metaphors,
Sure.
no dramatic background music, just the crushing weight, the endless fatigue, not finding joy in anything.
Mhm.
Is that shareable? I mean, does that get the likes online?
Uh-huh.
Or does the messy, inconvenient truth of mental illness just become too much for our curated worlds?
And that really brings up a fundamental question, doesn't it? What do we actually consider worthy of our attention? If pain doesn't have that aesthetic quality, does it just become invisible? Are we more drawn to a really compelling performance of suffering than to the stark, unvarnished reality of it? Makes you wonder what we're truly seeking when we engage with someone else's pain.
Look, I'll admit it. Years ago, I definitely sculpted my pain for social media. I did. Crafted these like elaborate posts about struggles, aiming for profound, relatable,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But the truth, honestly, I was just lost. And I really craved that acknowledgement,
Hmm.
for my artistic suffering, because the reality just felt so empty. Why is it easier to project that image than to just be seen
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable?
That feeling of hollowness you mentioned, even when you're crafting this apparently powerful narrative, that's really telling. It points this potential gap, right, between our internal state and how we present ourselves. A longing for connection that a carefully built persona, no matter how much people admire it, just can't truly fulfill.
Yeah,
It kind of echoes Nietzsche, doesn't it? A warning about wearing our wounds like some kind of badge of honor.
exactly. And we champion mental health awareness, we preach vulnerability.
Mm.
But are we maybe inadvertently valuing the idea of suffering, its aesthetic appeal, more than we actually support people whose struggles are quiet,
Mm-hmm.
messy, lack a catchy caption?
Mm-hmm.
We celebrate the tragic hero figure. But do we have that same empathy for someone who's just unwell?
And if you connect that to broader cultural narratives, I mean, there's a long history of elevating certain kinds of suffering. The tragic hero archetype, it's deeply ingrained in us.
Totally.
But what about the quiet strength of someone just navigating the daily grind without any dramatic flair? Does our compassion really extend to them? Or are we only captivated by the big, spectacular fall? It makes you question what we truly value in the human experience, really.
Let's be really clear here. Mental health isn't some fleeting trend or a playlist you curate carefully. It's the grueling task, often, of finding a therapist who even has openings.
Right, the practical stuff.
It's the persistent stigma that, let's be honest, still clings to needing medication. It's the unglamorous, messy, day-to-day battle to just function when your own mind feels like your worst enemy. Why does that messy reality feel so much less visible than the polished performance?
Well, that's the stark contrast, isn't it? Between the idealized image and the lived experience. The image is often palatable, shareable. The reality, often inconvenient, raw.
Yeah.
Our collective discomfort with that rawness might explain why we sort of gravitate towards the more aesthetically pleasing versions. It's almost like we prefer the idea of suffering over the messy truth of it.
So what if? What if by making depression seem deep or, artistic, wrapping it in this poetic shroud, we're actually stopping people, stopping them from seeking real, unglamorous solutions?
Like therapy, medication.
Exactly. Like therapy, meds, building routines, the stuff that doesn't make for a dramatic Instagram post. Could our romanticization be a kind of unintentional gatekeeping?
That's a critical point, the potential dangers of that romanticization.
Mm.
Could it inadvertently create a barrier, implying that true suffering has to be profound, inherently meaningful?
Right, and then it devalues the mundane stuff that actually works.
Exactly. Devaluing the effective paths to recovery.
Yeah.
It forces us to ask if we're valuing aesthetics over actual well-being.
I remember someone, their depression had become their entire identity.
Right.
Really, they spoke about it with this strange reverence, almost like a demanding artistic muse. Proudly, almost.
Wow.
And when they started getting better, through consistent treatment, they confessed something really unsettling. They said they felt less interesting,
Oof.
less special. Isn't that just a chilling thought?
That is deeply unsettling. It
Right.
really highlights how illness can get woven into your sense of self. If suffering becomes your primary identifier, then getting better can feel like losing your identity.
Yeah.
It reveals that fundamental human need we have for significance, doesn't it? Shows the powerful grip our narratives can have on us.
So, okay, moment of honesty for you listening. Are you truly grappling with your pain, your trauma, your darkness? Or has that darkness become, I don't know, a comfortable, familiar costume, one you're maybe afraid to take off because you don't know who you are without it? It's a confronting question, isn't it?
It really prompts that crucial self-reflection. Are we genuinely processing our pain? Or have we maybe developed an attachment to the identity our suffering has given us? Like Socrates said, right? Know thyself. Are we truly seeing ourselves or just the reflection of our pain?
We hear the mantra all the time, it's okay not to be okay. And it is absolutely vital. We need to acknowledge that. But is it also okay to stay not okay? To kind of wallow in it? Because let's face it, not okay often attracts more attention, more sympathy, more curated concern.
More than the quiet work of getting better.
Exactly. More than the messy, unglamorous journey of getting better ever could. What does that say about our social dynamics?
Well, it challenges the boundaries of empathy, doesn't it? And support. At what point does accepting struggle inadvertently enable stagnation? Could our compassion sometimes unintentionally reward the performance of suffering over actually pursuing wellness? Raises big questions about genuine support.
Think back, to the Romantic poets, Byron, Shelley, glorifying their melancholy,
Yeah.
turning it into this mark of intellectual, artistic superiority.
Yeah, that whole vibe.
Did their beautiful verses really help anyone navigate despair? Or did they just inadvertently make suffering an aesthetic ideal? Did they make it harder to just say, look, I'm sick, instead of, oh, my soul is a tormented landscape?
If you look at it historically, yeah, there's a long tradition linking suffering with artistic depth. Absolutely. But we have to critically examine if that romanticization truly serves people who are struggling, or if it just elevates the concept of suffering to this almost desirable status, obscuring the need for, practical support.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if arts sometimes inadvertently glorifies the pain itself.
Okay, take a moment. You, listening right now, think about your own online consumption. Whose beautiful struggle, whose perfectly articulated pain have you recently engaged with? Maybe almost like it was entertainment. Be honest with yourself. What were you really seeking in that moment?
That encourages a really critical look at our online habits, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Are we engaging with vulnerability in a way that actually fosters genuine connection, understanding? Or are we just passively consuming these curated narratives of suffering because they're dramatic or aesthetically appealing?
Yeah.
What does our consumption say about our own relationship with pain?
We praise vulnerability online constantly. But do you truly engage with the messy stuff, the incoherent, unattractive cries for help? Or are you more likely to like and share the breakdowns that are well-crafted, the ones that read like they're from a novel? Is our empathy online kind of selective?
That raises a crucial question about the nature of our online empathy, doesn't it? Is it really unconditional? Or is it maybe contingent on a certain level of articulation, aesthetic presentation?
Yeah.
Do we unintentionally prioritize pain that's well packaged over the raw, unfiltered expressions of distress? Challenges our whole notion of what it means to be supportive online.
Quick gut check for you. Would you rather be perceived as deeply wounded, haunted, complex, or genuinely, boringly happy, but maybe seen by the same people as shallow, simple, naive? Which of those carries more social currency right now? It's a stark choice, isn't it?
That dilemma really speaks to a fundamental human desire to be seen as significant. In a culture that often equates depth with suffering, the idea of being boringly happy can feel like you're less worthy, less complex.
Totally.
It really highlights the often perverse incentives of our social landscape. It's kind of twisted.
Online, it feels like everyone's a survivor now, right? With a compelling narrative, a whole trauma journey laid out, it's almost like a prerequisite for having an interesting profile.
Yeah, it can feel that way.
Yet the reality is that so many people are just surviving. Day after day, no dramatic arc, no audience. Just the quiet, relentless ache of getting through. Where do those stories fit in our collective consciousness?
What's striking there is the pressure to build that compelling narrative around our struggles. The quiet resilience of people who just endure without the drama often goes completely unnoticed, unacknowledged.
Yeah.
It really makes you question whose stories we're truly valuing.
Okay, let's get personal for a second. You, listening, when you share your own pain, what's the driving force, really? Is it a genuine desire for connection, Or is there maybe a subtle craving for validation?
Hmm.
Is your mental health awareness post truly about helping others feel less alone? Or is it, maybe even subconsciously, about shaping an image of yourself as deep, resilient, maybe even tragically interesting? Does your sadness ever feel like it sets you apart, makes you special?
That encourages a really brutal self-assessment of our motivations, doesn't it? Is our vulnerability genuinely about connection, or is there an element of seeking external validation, crafting a specific online persona?
The lines get blurry.
They really do, even to ourselves. You might suggest we need to explore the shadow motivations behind these carefully constructed narratives we build.
I'll confess something. I argue against the stigma of mental illness, like with real conviction. Yet, at the same time, I find myself deeply cynical about its trendification, its commodification, how it gets reduced to an online aesthetic.
I get that.
Does that make me a hypocrite?
Yeah.
Or just someone grappling with a really complicated reality? Feels like walking a tightrope sometimes.
I don't think it makes you a hypocrite. Not necessarily. I think it reflects the inherent tension, right?
Yeah.
In navigating this complex cultural thing, we can simultaneously advocate for destigmatization and be critical of the ways genuine suffering gets co-opted and commodified.
Okay.
It just speaks to the nuanced reality of engaging with these issues today. It's messy.
A therapist once shared this really powerful insight with me. She said, some individuals cling to their diagnosis, not because it defines them, but because it's the only narrative that has ever made them feel seen.
Wow.
The only story that has ever garnered recognition. Think about that. The unsettling comfort of a label, even a painful one. Why is significance sometimes found in sickness?
That insight is profound. Yeah.
Uh,
It suggests that if you lack other sources of validation or belonging, a diagnosis, however unwelcome it might feel initially, can provide a sense of identity, a narrative that gets recognition from others.
yeah.
It just highlights that deep human need we have to feel understood and significant.
Okay, here's an uncomfortable truth bomb. Sometimes the most moving depictions of depression, the ones that go viral, get floods of sympathetic emojis. They might actually be perpetuating a cycle.
Oh, so.
They risk making illness a familiar, almost comforting space, rather than a state to actively fight and escape. Could our well-intentioned empathy be unintentionally enabling people to stay stuck?
That really challenges the common belief that all expressions of vulnerability are inherently positive, doesn't it? Some portrayals of suffering, however artful they seem, might inadvertently reinforce a sense of resignation, or even create this perverse comfort in the familiar pain.
Yeah.
It forces us to question the true impact of the narratives we consume and share. What are they actually doing?
Look at TikTok. It's awash with trauma dumping set to sad, trending songs, millions of views. Is this genuine healing happening in real time? A collective unburdening?
Huh.
Or is it a new kind of emotional exhibitionism, amplified by algorithms, a craving for online validation? Are we truly processing our pain or just performing it for an audience? Where's the line between sharing and spectacle?
Yeah, the rise of platforms like TikTok has definitely created new ways to share personal struggles, no question. But the format itself, the emphasis on brevity, emotional impact, it raises important questions. How much deep processing is really happening versus the performative aspect, which is driven by algorithms and chasing online attention? It compels us to really consider the motivations behind these digital displays of vulnerability.
Okay, internal check-in time again.
Yeah.
Be brutally honest with yourself, just for a moment. Have you ever embellished your sadness, even just a little bit? Made your demons sound a bit more poetic, a bit more profound, a bit less like a mundane chemical imbalance, and a bit more like some tragic masterpiece? You don't have to tell anyone, but acknowledge it. Inside yourself, what drives that impulse?
That call for radical self-honesty is crucial. It asks us to examine that potential gap, doesn't it, between our internal experience of suffering and how we choose to present it, to ourselves and to the world.
Yeah.
Are we striving for accuracy or for dramatic effect? As Montaigne wrote, the greatest thing is to know how to belong to oneself. Are we truly belonging to ourselves then?
I knew someone. They posted daily about their dark night of the soul, these profound existential battles. It was poetic, raw, widely praised online for their courage. Yet their therapist, in a moment of, total frankness, mentioned they frequently missed appointments. The reason? They didn't feel inspired. Which narrative reflects reality? The carefully crafted online persona or the unglamorous avoidance of actual help? It's such a stark contrast.
That striking contrast really underscores the potential for a huge disconnect between the online performance of suffering and the everyday realities of living with mental health challenges.
Yeah.
It forces us to question the authenticity of narratives that prioritize dramatic flair over the often mundane work of seeking and engaging with support. The image versus the reality.
Now, let's just flip the script completely for a second. What if your authentic and vulnerable portrayal of your very real depression, shared with the purest intentions? What if that is inadvertently making someone else feel bad? Someone whose suffering is messy, unarticulated, deeply unpoetic.
Making them feel
Like their pain is invalid, like they're somehow doing depression wrong.
Mhm.
Could our efforts to connect actually be isolating others?
That introduces a really critical ethical dimension to sharing our personal struggles. Our individual narratives, however well-intentioned, can have these unintended consequences, potentially creating feelings of inadequacy and validation.
Yeah.
For those whose experiences just don't align with the often romanticized image of a beautiful struggle, it forces us to consider the broader impact of our individual stories.
Let's be frank, there's often this desire for our pain to be special.
Right.
Not just another case study, not just a textbook definition. We want it to mean something more. And that's why we might subconsciously craft it, refine the edges, choose the perfect filter, and then call the result raw.
Mm.
But is it truly raw or carefully constructed? What are we hoping to achieve by making our pain feel exceptional?
That observation really touches on a deep-seated human longing for meaning, for significance. Our suffering can feel inherently meaningless unless we can somehow imbue it with purpose or transform it into something extraordinary.
So we curate it.
Exactly. The act of curation becomes a way of trying to achieve that sense of specialness. It speaks to our inherent need for narrative and meaning in our lives.
Think about Sylvia Plath, Van Gogh, Kurt Cobain. We often idolize their pain, don't we, as the crucible of their genius. We consume their art, born from their suffering. But here's a profoundly uncomfortable question. Would we trade their iconic art, their legendary status, to have had them be simply, well, healthy, less iconic, but more alive?
That's a tough one.
Do we, on some level, need our artists to suffer for our consumption? It's a disturbing thought.
It really confronts that deeply problematic romanticization of the tortured artist trope. We frequently celebrate the art that comes from suffering while simultaneously overlooking the devastating human cost.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront whether our admiration for the work inadvertently glorifies the very pain that fueled it, challenges our whole understanding of suffering and creativity.
Maybe. Perhaps the core issue isn't just that we romanticize depression. Maybe the more unsettling truth is that we exist in a world maybe devoid of inherent meaning, so lacking in genuine connection. That we need our suffering to feel like art, like something profound, just to feel anything real at all. Could our aestheticizing of pain be a symptom of a deeper societal void?
That introduces a really profound and unsettling perspective. It suggests the drive to aestheticize suffering might stem from a deeper existential emptiness, a yearning for meaning in a world that often feels empty.
Yeah.
If ordinary life feels inherently insignificant, maybe we turn to suffering, when it's artfully presented, as a source of perceived depth and authenticity. Speaks to that fundamental human search for meaning.
And what if your carefully constructed battle with depression, that epic narrative you've built,
Yeah.
what if it's a story you tell yourself? Because the alternative feels too ordinary, too terrifyingly unromantic to accept.
The alternative being
That life is just incredibly difficult sometimes, often mundane, and that your brain chemistry might just be a little off.
that simple explanation.
Could our grand narratives just be a way to avoid a simpler, maybe more unsettling truth?
Well, it challenges our need for that grand narrative around mental illness, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sometimes the reality is simply that our brains aren't functioning optimally, just like any other organ.
Right.
The resistance to that ordinary explanation might come from a deep desire for a more profound, meaningful understanding of our pain. Encourages us to consider the power of simple explanations.
You still hold on to the beliefs, don't you? Even just a little bit. That your particular brand of sadness, your specific shade of darkness is somehow unique, more nuanced, more special.
That quiet observation really cuts to the heart of our individual experience of suffering. While our feelings are undeniably real, personal, the underlying mechanisms, the shared human experience of pain, are often far less unique than we might believe. Challenges our sense of individual exceptionalism in suffering.
Okay, mic drop zone. The most beautiful coffins are still coffins. Romanticizing depression, adorning it with art and metaphor, doesn't diminish its inherent deadliness one bit. It simply makes the inevitable end look more aesthetically pleasing.
That is a stark analogy. Powerful, unsettling, a reminder of the fundamental danger, regardless of how artfully it's portrayed. The aesthetic should never overshadow the potential devastation. Underscores the critical importance of recognizing the underlying threat.
Yeah.
Uh,
So we've kind of come full circle, and you still haven't truly answered it, have you? Deep down, if your depression wasn't a compelling narrative, if it wasn't a defining character trait, if it was just a sickness like the flu or a broken limb,
mm.
would you still find it so captivating, so integral to who you are? It's a core question we really need to confront.
It forces us to confront that central issue, doesn't it? Whether our suffering has become inseparable from our identity, and whether we'd still recognize ourselves or feel like ourselves without its defining presence, compels us to look beyond the narrative.
Okay, soft call to action here. If this deep dive has stirred something in you, if you felt that uncomfortable flicker of recognition, share it.
Mhm.
Send it to someone you suspect might be curating their pain a little too beautifully. They might need to hear this, from a voice outside their own echo chamber. Sometimes a nudge is all it takes.
Sometimes the messages that resonate most deeply are the ones that challenge our comfortable assumptions.
Yeah.
Sharing this exploration might offer someone a fresh perspective on their own relationship with their suffering and maybe the path toward healing. It's about fostering a wider conversation.
What if? What if our relentless cultural obsession with feeling deeply, with mining every fleeting sad moment for profound meaning? What if it's just a sophisticated defense mechanism against the perceived emptiness of feeling? Nothing at all.
A terror of ordinariness.
Yeah, a deep-seated terror of ordinariness. Could our pursuit of depth actually be a flight from simplicity?
That suggests the relentless pursuit of deep emotions might be a way to avoid confronting that perceived lack of inherent meaning in everyday life. We might be so afraid of feeling ordinary that we actively seek out, even cultivate intense emotional experiences, including suffering, just to create a sense of significance. Challenges our definitions of a meaningful life.
Let's redefine bravery for a second. Is it really braver to share your darkness with eloquent words and haunting metaphors for an admiring audience? Or is it braver to fight that darkness silently, messily, unglamorously, without any external validation, simply for the sake of your own well-being? It's a fundamental shift in perspective, isn't it?
That redefinition of bravery really shifts the focus from outward performance to inward resilience. True courage might lie not in performance of vulnerability, but in the quiet, persistent effort to heal. Even when no one is watching or applauding,
Yeah.
it highlights those often unseen battles we wage within ourselves.
We filter our sadness online, just like we filter our selfies, don't we? Enhancing the drama, minimizing the mundane, boosting the tragic contrast, until it becomes this perfectly shareable, perfectly tragic caricature of pain. What are we truly showing? And what are we carefully hiding?
That analogy powerfully illustrates how we can manipulate and present our suffering, conforming to online expectations, aesthetic norms, potentially distorting the reality of our experience in the process. Raises questions about the authenticity of our digital selves. Definitely.
Imagine depression as a raw, gaping physical wound. Exposed, unpleasant, undeniably real. Would you meticulously photograph its artistic decay for likes and comments? Would you write elaborate poetry about its textures and hues?
Probably not.
Or would your immediate instinct be to desperately seek a way to stitch it closed, to cleanse it, to heal it? Regardless of how unglamorous the process looks, it's a visceral comparison, I know.
It is. But it cuts through the romanticization, forcefully highlighting the inherent unpleasantness and the urgent need for healing, whether physical or mental. Underscores the fundamental difference between aesthetic appreciation and the absolute imperative for recovery.
Okay, quick self-inventory. Mentally scroll through the ways you've described your own mental health struggles, even just in your own head. Now ask yourself honestly, was that language chosen primarily for accurate self-understanding? Or was it also, maybe subconsciously, chosen for dramatic effect, for impact, for the sake of a better story? It's subtle, but important.
That encourages a really mindful examination of our internal narrative around our struggles. Are we using language that promotes clarity, self-compassion, or are we framing our experiences in a way that reinforces a particular identity or elicits a specific response?
Yeah.
It's about understanding the power of the words we use, even just to ourselves.
There's this subtle but insidious form of praise people give. You articulate your pain so beautifully. You're so eloquent about your suffering. Be wary of it. Seriously, you risk becoming so skilled at performing your pain that people admire the performance more than they truly see you. the person struggling beneath the surface of those carefully chosen words. It's a dangerous kind of invisibility.
That warns against the potential dangers of external validation based solely on the aesthetic appeal of our suffering.
Yeah,
We risk becoming defined by our pain narrative. The genuine depth of our experience gets overshadowed by that eloquence of how we talk about it.
right.
Highlights the importance of being seen for who we are, not just for how we express our pain.
A friend once shared something heartbreaking. She said, "My depression gained me thousands of followers, this outpouring of support from strangers online.
Uh-huh.
But," she said, "it cost me my real-life friendships. No one in my actual life knew how to connect with the me that wasn't a tragic internet persona." That's a stark price to pay for online validation.
That poignant anecdote powerfully illustrates the potential cost, doesn't it? Online engagement with curated suffering can come at the significant expense of genuine, real-world connection and support. The persona we present online might not reflect our true needs or our authentic selves, ultimately leading to isolation.
Yeah. What is the real, often blurry line between raising genuine awareness for a debilitating illness and unintentionally turning suffering into this bizarre competition, a grim, unspoken Olympics of who has endured the most poetically, the most shareably?
The suffering Olympics.
Are we fostering genuine empathy or inadvertently creating new, unsettling hierarchies of pain? It's a question worth grappling with.
It raises critical ethical concerns, doesn't it? The potential for performative vulnerability to inadvertently create a culture of comparison, even competition around suffering, which can be profoundly detrimental to genuine empathy and support, challenges us to examine the underlying dynamics of our online interactions.
You might believe that sharing your darkest thoughts online, totally unfiltered, equates to true authenticity. But sometimes, true authenticity isn't a dramatic confessional post. Sometimes it's just getting out of bed, taking a shower when every fiber of your being resists, faking functionality until, slowly, maybe imperceptibly, you actually start to function again, with no audience, no applause, just quiet, personal resilience.
That offers a powerful redefinition of authenticity, yeah. Shifting the focus from outward performance to the quiet, internal struggle. The often unglamorous acts of self-care that go unnoticed but are absolutely essential for survival, for recovery.
Yeah.
Reminds us that true strength isn't always visible.
Here's a thought that might actually set you free. You don't need to make your depression an aesthetic to validate its existence. You don't need to make it sound profound for it to be undeniably real.
You
simply need to acknowledge it and seek appropriate care, just like you would with any other illness, period. That simple act can be incredibly liberating.
That is a profoundly liberating thought. It strips away the pressure to find meaning or beauty in suffering, reframes mental illness as a health issue requiring practical care and treatment, rather than some source of identity or artistic inspiration.
Right.
It empowers us to prioritize well-being over aesthetics. Simple as that.
Who taught you that? Who instilled in you the belief that your pain had to be beautiful, had to be tragic, to be legitimate? Was it your favorite tormented artist? Your carefully curated Instagram feed full of artfully melancholic influencers?
Maybe.
Or was it perhaps your own deep-seated fear of being ordinary in your suffering? Trace that belief back. Where did it start?
That prompts us to consider the various cultural influences, internal anxieties that might contribute to that belief, that suffering needs to be exceptional or aesthetically pleasing to be worthy of attention.
Yeah.
Encourages us to critically examine the messages we've internalized about pain and vulnerability.
I used to believe my melancholy made me deep, an old soul, somehow more perceptive than other people. Then, after years of living with it, I realized, mostly, it just made me incredibly tired, chronically irritable, and frankly, a bit predictable. The supposed depth was often just exhaustion masquerading in a more appealing guise. It was a hard truth to confront.
That personal reflection really highlights the potential for self-deception, doesn't it? Where the outward signs of suffering can be misconstrued as indicators of profound insight, masking the more mundane, debilitating realities, underscores the importance of honest self-assessment.
Drawing on Carl Jung again.
Yeah.
One might argue that your romanticized depression, your carefully tended darkness, it's simply your shadow self, yearning for integration and understanding, not admiration.
Right, it seeks healing.
Exactly. It seeks healing, not a pedestal to be worshipped for its tragic beauty. It's about wholeness, not just highlighting the broken parts.
Drawing on Jungian psychology, yeah, That perspective suggests our darker aspects, when romanticized and idealized, actually prevent genuine integration. Healing, the shadow needs to be acknowledged, understood, embraced as part of the whole self, not just glorified for its perceived allure. It's about moving towards psychological integration, wholeness.
Shh. Listen closely. There's a fundamental aspect of illness, including mental illness, that is simply illness. No profound insights attached, no poetic metaphors, just a biological, chemical drain. And that's often the part that gets omitted from our online narratives, isn't it? The boring, unglamorous, inconvenient reality. Why do we tend to skip over that?
Well, it points to the inherent selectivity in our shared narratives, doesn't it? We often focus on the emotional, the existential dimensions, potentially neglecting the more clinical, less dramatic aspects, which can create an incomplete, even misleading picture of the lived experience. It's about acknowledging the full spectrum of being unwell.
Have you ever lingered in your sadness? Just a little longer than perhaps necessary. Because the attention it elicited, the concern it sparked, felt like a warm, comforting blanket in a cold, indifferent world.
Oof, that's a hard question.
It's a difficult question to ask ourselves, honestly. But try. What did that comfort provide you?
That is a challenging but crucial question. It probes the potential for unconscious secondary gains from our suffering. Could we be inadvertently prolonging our pain, even subtly, because of the comfort, validation, or sense of identity it might provide? Requires a deep level of self-awareness.
Yeah. Let's dismantle a pervasive myth right here. There is absolutely no inherent nobility in suffering itself. None.
Try again?
None whatsoever. The nobility, if it exists at all, lies solely in the often unglamorous effort to alleviate that suffering, both in yourself and in others, even if that effort is messy, awkward, and entirely unshareable. It's about action, not just endurance.
That statement directly challenges that deeply ingrained romantic idealization of suffering,
Yeah.
asserting that true value lies not in passively enduring pain, but in actively, often unheroically, working towards alleviating it, regardless of how unglamorous that process might be.
Exactly.
Shifts the focus from the state of suffering to the act of healing.
Maybe, just maybe, you're not a tortured artist. Maybe you're not a beautifully broken soul. Maybe you are simply a person who is currently unwell and in need of support and care. Not applause for the eloquence of your pain narrative.
And that's okay.
And that's perfectly okay. In fact, it's profoundly human. It's about accepting our vulnerability without needing to embellish it.
That offers a powerfully normalizing, validating perspective. It really does. Removes the pressure to conform to some romanticized ideal of suffering. Affirms the simple reality of being unwell and deserving support, compassion, care. Free from needing external validation through dramatic narratives.
Okay, identity challenge time. If you were given a choice right now between being widely admired and deeply understood for your beautiful, articulate darkness, or being completely unknown but genuinely, quietly healed, which version of yourself would you choose to inhabit? Which story would you willingly let go of? It's a profound fork in the road.
That stark hypothetical forces a direct confrontation, doesn't it? With our potential attachment to the identity of suffering versus the profound prospect of a life free from that pain, even if it means giving up external validation and a familiar narrative, compels us to consider our deepest desires, really does.
You cannot truly begin to heal the part of you that, perhaps unconsciously, derives a sense of identity or seeks validation through your illness until you honestly acknowledge the existence of that part.
That admission.
The bitter pill to swallow, that admission. But it's often the crucial first step towards genuine freedom.
Acknowledging any potential secondary gains or subconscious attachments to our suffering, it's challenging but absolutely necessary for authentic healing. Requires a deep level of self-awareness, brutal honesty. It can be uncomfortable but ultimately profoundly liberating.
Hypothetical for you. If a scientifically proven cure for depression was discovered tomorrow, but it was utterly mundane, utterly boring, no grand tales of overcoming adversity, just a simple Bailey pill and some quiet, undramatic cognitive exercises.
Okay.
Would you wholeheartedly embrace it?
Yeah.
Even if it meant potentially losing your self-perceived tragic depth, your artistic edge, your compelling story. Consider that for a moment. Really sit with it.
That thought experiment directly probes our willingness to embrace a simple, unromanticized solution, doesn't it? Even if it fundamentally challenges our self-perception and the narratives we've built around our pain, forces us to confront whether we truly desire healing above all else.
Your meticulously curated pain, your aesthetically pleasing suffering. It often isn't true vulnerability. Let's be real. More often than not, it's a carefully constructed performance with a built-in defense mechanism
Designed to.
designed to keep real, messy, unpredictable human connection at a safe, admiring distance. It's a form of controlled exposure, not real openness.
True vulnerability is often uncomfortable, imperfect, even a little messy.
Yeah.
The carefully constructed narrative of suffering, while it looks open and relatable, can actually act as a subtle barrier to genuine intimacy connection by controlling the terms of engagement, maintaining distance.
Fast forward 10, 20 years. When you look back on this current era, this time of intense mental health openness and awareness online, what will your assessment be? Will you see a period of genuine life-saving progress, destigmatization, or will you see a mass romanticization of suffering that inadvertently kept millions of people beautifully, poetically, stuck? It's a legacy we are collectively creating right now.
That encourages a crucial long-term perspective on our current cultural trends around mental health.
Yeah. Will our focus on aesthetics and performative vulnerability ultimately serve to advance genuine understanding and treatment? Or might it inadvertently hinder true progress? Vital question for our collective future.
Here's a paradox for you to ponder. Perhaps truly honoring your depression, truly acknowledging your struggle, means consciously choosing not to make it your entire defining characteristic. Maybe it means actively fighting for a vision of yourself that exists beyond the confines of that struggle, beyond the pain, beyond the well-worn narrative. It's about reclaiming your whole self.
That offers a counterintuitive yet profoundly liberating perspective.
Wow.
That truly honoring our suffering might involve consciously creating space for a self that is not solely defined by that suffering.
Yes.
Allowing for growth, healing, the emergence of an identity that transcends the illness narrative, embracing a more expansive sense of self. Personal confession time again. I've definitely romanticized my own emotional scars in the past. Polished their narratives, found the poetic phrasing, even convinced myself they were badges of honor.
We've all probably done that a bit.
But the real transformative healing, that unfolded in the quiet, messy, unglamorous moments of brutal self-honesty, often accompanied by ugly crying. That's the authentic story, the one I often kept hidden.
That personal confession powerfully underscores the significant difference, doesn't it, between the curated narrative of healing and the messy, often invisible work of actual recovery. True, lasting healing often happens in those private spaces, far removed from the public gaze and the need for external validation.
We are all, to some extent, complicit in this pervasive aesthetic of sadness, this subtle cult of beautiful brokenness. We consume it, we contribute to it, we often reward it with our attention.
True.
But right here, in this shared space, we can at least pose the uncomfortable question. Is being beautifully broke ultimately just another, albeit more ornate, gilded cage? It's time to examine our complicity.
That acknowledges our collective role in perpetuating this romanticization.
Yeah.
By critically examining our consumption, our creation of these narratives, we can begin to question if we're inadvertently trapping ourselves and others. Within a superficially appealing but ultimately limiting framework, requires a collective shift in perspective.
Remember the initial question. Would you still talk about your sadness if it wasn't tragic? The deeper, more resonant question that lies beneath is this. What are you truly afraid you will become if you are no longer tragic? If you shed the identity of being deeply wounded? Who are you, at your core, without the darkness as your defining narrative? It's the ultimate identity question, isn't it?
That final probing question delves into the deepest fears, the anxieties that might underlie our attachment to the identity of suffering. What awaits us beyond the familiar contours of our pain narrative? Who are we when we are no longer defined primarily by our wounds? It's an invitation to explore the uncharted territories of our authentic selves.
Healing isn't a grand, poetic narrative arc. It really isn't. It's often just the quiet, persistent, utterly boring day-after-day choice to simply try again. Especially on the days when no one is watching and when no one will ever fully understand the immense effort it took just to keep going.
That beautifully encapsulates the often mundane reality of healing,
Yeah.
emphasizing the quiet resilience, the consistent effort that lie at the heart of recovery, far removed from the dramatic, often romanticized narratives we see, highlights the quiet heroism of everyday persistence.
If any part of this deep dive resonated uncomfortably, if you felt that unsettling warmth of recognition, good. I encourage you to listen again. The truth doesn't become gentler with repetition, but perhaps you will become a little bit braver in hearing it.
Sometimes the most important, potentially transformative messages, they do require repeated engagement to fully resonate. To challenge our deeply ingrained beliefs, patterns, allow yourself the space to revisit these ideas.
And if this has prompted you to question your own narrative, your relationship with your pain. Consider sharing it with that friend you suspect might need permission to break up with their beautiful suffering. They might just be waiting for an invitation to pursue a quieter, less glamorous path to recovery.
Sharing this exploration might provide someone with the validation, the encouragement they need to shift their perspective on their own suffering and to embrace the possibility of a less dramatic, but ultimately more fulfilling path toward healing and well-being.
This has been the deep dive. We're not here to offer easy comfort. We aim to be a mirror, what you see reflected and what you ultimately choose to do with that reflection. Well, that's entirely in your hands.
The journey of self-discovery and change is a personal one. Our intention here is just to provide a space for reflection, critical thinking, empowering you to navigate your own path with greater awareness.
Abrupt cut to unsettling outro music.